Hello, are you here to debate?
Yep.
All right. What's your name, age, pronouns, please?
John, 21, and I'm a male.
Okay, so what are your pronouns?
That would be he, him.
Great. Okay, John, what topic on the board are you calling in to talk about?
The trans men, trans women are the men/women.
Oh, I agree. Trans men and women are men and women.
That's what I'm debating.
Yeah, I know. It was a joke.
That.
Okay, John, go ahead. State your case.
All right. So I don't believe there is an actual difference, politically speaking, between biological sex and gender. The idea that there's a difference in the modern world originates from John Money in the 1960s, and his studies. Those are proven to be fraudulent, and there is very clear biological differences between what a man and a woman is, that being the Y chromosome, and so there isn't a true legislative difference that should be made.
Okay, so great. So I'm going to answer a couple of those things. First of all, the idea that gender and sex are separate is not the current understanding of gender and sex in the modern world. We understand that gender and sex have an interlinking, but they are two different things. John Money didn't permeate this idea, but in John Money did do some pretty fucked up experiments. I wouldn't call them fraudulent, but they were definitely unethical. I don't know what you mean by like fraudulent. Like the experiments were still
he lied about the stuff that went in. So he lied about the results, thus making it fraudulent.
Oh, sure. But we don't use any of John Money's experience. John Money's experiments actively disprove himself. So are you saying John Money is actually correct?
No, I'm saying his results were fraudulent. But what happened was during the 1960s, the sexual liberation movement of the 1960s.
Which of his experiments which of his experiments had false results that you would say have been misleading the gender conversation?
The David Reimer experiment.
Okay, the David Reimer experiment debunks John Money. His experiment debunked himself. So you're saying he lied about the results of an experiment that proved himself wrong.
Because initially he lied, saying that it did confirm what he was saying. It came out afterwards that he lied. So
yes,
it does
and we don't use, but we don't use.
Before that came out.
Hold on. But I asked you which of his experiments have like sort of permeate the gender conversation. And as somebody who studies gender, we know for a fact that his experiments proved him wrong. So we don't use his experiments to defend gender. We actually use his experiment, we don't use his experiments to defend his side of gender. We use his experiment to defend the other side, that sex and gender have a linking. He believed sex and gender did not have a link, and they were two completely separate things. Nobody who studies modern sex and gender believes this. We know that they are an interlinked psychosocial phenomenon.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is, he is the one who got it pushed into the mainstream because, yes, you're correct. It was fraudulent. He lied about his things, so it's not used anymore. But in the 1960s, before it came out that what he did was fraudulent and unethical, the 1960s sexual liberation movement pushed that into the mainstream, thus creating a politicized topic that made it very hard to argue against it, and then lots of other
hard to argue against it. What do you mean hard to argue? First of all,
it became a super political topic.
Yeah, sure. Our sort of understanding of gender, like, didn't even begin with John Money. Like the social aspect of gender started as something that was brought about in like the early 1900s from the Institute of Sexology in Germany. So John Money might have like popularized this idea that gender and sex are separate entities, but again, we don't subscribe to that. So I don't know what the point of the John Money conversation is, except it seems like a bit of a red herring. Your then other claim was that in order to be a woman, you must have two X chromosomes. Like, it's your chromosomes. Like the Y chromosome creates a man, and the lack of it
of a Y chromosome, not necessarily specifically two X's.
So anybody who has a lack of a Y chromosome is a woman. So you're saying sex and gender are completely linked, and that all females are women.
Depending on, so all adult females are women.
All adult females are women,
if you look
all,
yeah.
and so to my So that I have you correct, all adult females are women and all youth females are girls.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see the screen of this chat of the like stream anymore? Or are you clicked off of that?
I can see. I've got it muted.
Okay.
It's a couple minutes, I don't know how long it's behind a little bit.
Sure. I'm just wondering if you can see it right now. I have a picture of a really cute woman on the screen. What do you think of her?
I cannot see that yet.
Okay, it'll pop up. Don't worry, it'll pop soon.
Oh, there we go. That is not a human, though.
You didn't stipulate human was a need to be a woman. You just said had a Y chromosome or had lack of a Y chromosome.
We're talking about the human species.
Oh, okay. So wait. So there is a difference between gender only exists amongst humans, is what you're telling me now.
Gender exists among other animals, of course, but I couldn't talk about the chromosomal differences because I don't know.
Okay. What other animals have their own gender categories?
I think it's some species of frogs and some species of fish. They have weird things that happen where they can actually switch genders or switch sexes and reproduce, change from male to female, essentially. And they have the biological function to recreate, but that is a non-human species and doesn't play into, like, humans don't do that.
Okay, so but this is sort of different than what I asked, right? Because you're telling me that when it comes to gender and sex, that they are the same thing. Sex and gender are the same. However, other species with sex can't be women, even though sex and gender are the same thing. All females would be women or girls. You're saying they're not actually the same thing, and there's a stipulation added to that, whereas gender is a human category. And then when I asked you and you said no, it's not strict, or you said that other species do have gender, and the way you describe that is that there are species whose sex changes, but I didn't ask about their sex changing, right? Because this would just be presupposing that sex and gender are the same thing again. I'm asking what other species exhibit gender as social categories.
So as a social category, on the social definition of a gender, you'd have to look at, there's pack animals that exhibit gender behaviors. But again, I don't care about the legislative or purposeful debates of an animal. Like,
well, but this is part of the conversation, right? Like, if you
look on a medical document, you list gender and sex is used interchangeably.
Yeah, but that's not a way to prove your claim, like, right? If it's just about what's written on a medical document, then, like, if all medical documents changed, you would say that sex and gender are no longer the same thing.
It's an example, as in it is a terminology that is currently used.
Yeah, I don't deny that there's a large group of people, right, that use sex and gender interchangeably. I don't deny that that's the case. My claim would be that they aren't actually the same thing. Just because people use them the same doesn't make them the same, right? And I think you've already conceded that they're not the same, because in order to be, if they were exactly the same, if gender and sex were the same, all female animals would be women or girls, and all male animals would be boys and men. But it is not the case. We add a level of human because us as humans are social creatures, right? Gender wouldn't exist without humans on the planet. No other animals parlay a level of gender that we do, right? No other animals really categorize themselves in gender. They exhibit or tend to exhibit like male and female intrinsic what's the word I'm looking for? Not reactions, but they tend to have like impulses generated by their sex, which can be relayed down to like a level of like hormones and things like that. And we do too. We have some like levels of actions that can be boiled down to like looking at like hormones and see how hormones increase our likelihood to do X, Y, or Z. But when we're talking gender, right? Like you've said, gender is a human born thing that would make it intrinsically social.
There is a social aspect to gender, as in talking about gender roles. However, a gender role does not mean if you are a stereotypical woman fulfilling, the of the modern Western world fulfilling the gender roles of a woman versus a woman fulfilling the quote-unquote gender roles of a man, that does not make her now a man for fulfilling a societal. So yes, there is things that you attribute
what makes someone a
to
man?
a specific gender. What makes someone a man is being an adult male. So the Y chromosome past sexual maturity.
Okay.
But just because a man
hold on.
displays feminine traits.
Wait. I just want to boil into this. I want to boil into this again, because you've done a category error again. You've said what makes someone a man is that they're an adult male with a Y chromosome, which means that all adult male animals are now men. But you've already agreed that they can't be.
This is talking about humans.
Unfortunately, we're not, because humans are not the only species that exhibit sexual traits. So
they are the only species that matter to any form of legislative body governing our country.
Legislative body doesn't change. Legislative bodies don't change biology, right?
Well,
I don't care what the legislative body says. If we're having a conversation, hold on, John, listen to what I'm saying here. If we are talking about sex and gender, and we're saying that gender is tied to some intrinsic biology, right? And we're saying that intrinsic biology is related to a primary sexual characteristic. Those primary sexual characteristics don't go away just because something now is not human anymore. If you're saying it's tied intrinsically instead, gender's tied intrinsically to some level of humanness, well, then you're conceding that gender is a social thing. And the only reason it's tied to humans is because we have the ability to socialize and categorize on a level of gender, whereas other species do not, right? So it can only be one of those two things. So if it is the case that gender is tied to the X or Y chromosome, then all animals also have that X or Y chromosome. You can't just split it and say, but legislatively, we don't. I'm not worried about what we do legislatively. I'm worried about the conversation on, is sex and gender the same, or are they different?
In the case of humans, they are the same.
Okay, I don't think you listened to what I just said.
Not all species are the same because, again, there are species that can change from a male to a female reproductively, such as certain species of fish and frogs, but those don't matter to the conversation because we are not frogs or fish. We are humans.
The conversation we're having right now,
cannot make that change.
John, the conversation we're having right now is, are trans men and women men and women? And your claim is no, because gender is tied to biology. The claim is not, can we humans change sex? That's not the claim yet. Or that's not the claim that we're at initially. It is trans men and women can't be men and women because gender is tied to sex. However, here I show you sex-based creatures that you're saying would not have a level of gender, which means gender isn't inherently tied to sex. The sex aspect isn't actually the part that we're hard pressed to tie gender to. It's instead a social aspect, and that social aspect would be the social aspect of the species of human, as well as the social aspect of the species of age. The biological aspect of sex is actually the thing that we don't intrinsically tie it to. Because again, if that was the case, all female creatures would be a woman or a girl, and all male creatures would be a boy or a man. Can you respond to this point?
Because different species have different biological structures. Gender is tied to sex, but when you try and say that different species have different forms of gender, it's because different species have different sexes and they have different biology, different biology.
What species that reproduces dimorphically, like humans, have different sexes than males and females?
And a man is a human male.
Wait, hold on. We can't glide past that. You said different species have different sexes. If we're talking about species that reproduce dimorphically, like humans, what species that reproduces dimorphically has different sexes than male and female? Because even the frogs or the seahorses that can change sex, they're not changing to some new sex. They're just changing from male to female or female to male.
Okay. Then I misspoke. Again, I hesitate to speak definitively on every species across the animal kingdom, which is why when I call in and you're saying trans men and women are what they're trying to identify as, we're talking about humans. Like, in the human aspect, gender is inherently tied to sex. And so gender roles, when you try and talk about gender roles, it is not the gender that is the focus, it is the role of that gender, which is the societal aspect.
Okay.
And so it's not saying that by sex a woman has to do X, Y, or Z. It's saying that is the societal role of that gender. And so just because a woman fulfills the role of a man, the male gender, that does not make her a man.
Okay, so you are special pleading. You're saying that gender and sex are not tied together at all unless it's specifically humans in which gender and sex are now tied together. This would be a special
I'm saying
plea.
that I'm refusing to speak definitively on other animals because I haven't studied other animals, because I don't care, because it doesn't affect
I can tell you animals don't have the social structures of humans to have concepts of gender. They don't even have the intellect of humans to have a concept of gender.
Different animals have different social structures. But I'm not an expert on
I'm not asking you to be an expert.
Any research on animals, so I'm just not going to speak about animals.
I'm not asking you to be an expert, John. John, I'm not asking you to be an expert. What I'm trying to relay to you is that if your claim is sex and gender are the same, but only when it comes to humans, then you are inherently making a special plead fallacy. If you are saying sex and gender are not the same, right? Just in general, that sex and gender are not the same concept, then that's not the case. But when you say they are the same only in this one instance, that's a special plead.
No,
all of a sudden, the fact that we're humans,
that I have done research into, because I don't care about animals, and so I'm not going to make claims on things
this isn't about animals. It's about recognizing that other species have sex. Sex is not inherent to humans. So if you say that gender is specifically tied to the sexual feature, right? That the sexual feature is what matters here in gender categories. If you're making that the claim, then that would hold for all species that have sex, not just humans. It would have to.
Okay, then I will make that claim.
Okay, so you're claiming that all...
But can we talk about trans men and trans women?
We are. The conversation is about sex and gender.
A man is a human.
Yeah. Okay, so let me just try to explain to you what I'm trying to lead you to the water, but I think I need to just bring the water to you. The reason why it's important to make this distinction of sex and gender that we're talking about right now is because gender is inherently a category that only exists within the human species, and only exists within the human species after we've evolved to a certain level of social structures, right? When we were walking around as Neanderthals, we didn't have concepts of gender. It wasn't a thing because our brains hadn't hit the process in which we could identify in ways like that, right? Gender is an inherently social thing. We see it from the fact that only humans possess and show attributions of gender, and we see it in the fact that we look at gender on a social level of age as well. When we say women and girls, right, we're talking about specifically people over the age of 18, usually in like a Western like American sense. When I say woman, and I would assume you as well, you mean somebody over the age of 18. That's just an arbitrary number that we place on it. If we're saying adult,
biologically speaking, now that I would say that would be the difference between an adult. Sorry, let me back. Biologically speaking, a man and a woman is a biological male or female that has reached the sexual maturity of the human race. I'm not saying on a legal aspect about, like, in case you're going to make some kind of like straw man, or what about age of consent? No, age of consent is 18. Like, just blocking that off before, and I'm not arguing that. But biologically speaking, a man is once you've reached sexual maturity, That is a biological thing. That's not just a construct.
Okay, but hold on. If you're saying that trans women can't be women, right? In this same breath, you're now saying that 10-year-olds can be women. If a 10-year-old reaches the sexual age of maturity, they are now considered a woman, right?
On a biological level, not a ethical or social level.
So you're saying woman is a social term and it's a biological term.
There are different ways to use it legally speaking, and
but I don't even care about legality here. I'm not talking about legality, right? Throw legality out of it. When you use the phrase woman, have you ever in your life referred to someone under the age of 18 when you have used that word?
I've said young woman before. Young woman is a term that is commonly used for those who are in that, late teenage range.
I don't use the term young woman.
The age of...
I don't think it's a good term.
I'm not saying whether or not it's a good term or ethical term. Again, biologically like for legalities, biological doesn't necessarily mean ethical.
But again, I'm not worried about legality at the moment.
And there's a difference between, I'm just covering my bases in case someone tries to go, oh, well, so you think you should be able to do X, Y, and Z because they're a woman, right? Am I saying, no, there's an ethical difference? So I'm just covering my bases by bringing those up.
No, what I'm asking you, wait, really quickly, I just want to boil down here to what I'm specifically asking you, right? What I'm specifically asking is that when we use the phrase woman, when we're making category distinctions under the phrase woman, what we are saying inherently is we're referring to social categories. The reason we know this is because when I say the phrase woman, we don't mean people under the age of 18, which means we're not looking at a biological thing. We are inherently looking at a social thing, right? So to make the claim that like woman is socially tied to sex, when we also look at biologically tied to sex, when we also look at the social side of humans as a species, as well as age, it seems weird that we're making the biological one the most important aspect here.
Because there's a difference between progressing biologically within your sex and when you biologically mature versus switching from claiming that you're switching from the sex that has no Y chromosome or a Y chromosome to the opposing sex.
Okay, so this is where now we have to have a different
debating. Well, there's a difference between saying the difference between a girl and a woman and the difference between saying a man and a woman or a boy and a girl. Those are complete two different paths. One does not develop into the other.
Okay, this is where we have to have a different conversation now. We have to have a different conversation now. And we'll try to make this quick because somebody does want us to move on. You're making the claim that it is necessary to lack a Y chromosome in order to be a woman. So in order to be a woman, you must possess no Y chromosome. Is this correct?
Yes, because if you possess a Y chromosome, then you are a male.
Okay, and this is a necessary condition. Anyone who possesses a Y chromosome cannot be a woman.
Yes.
Okay. It will pop up on the screen in a second. On the screen, I have a medical case study, one of many medical cases very similar to this, in which somebody who had a pure 46 XY karyotyping got pregnant and gave birth. This is the summary of knowledge about women who have pure XY karyotypes. So this person who has a pure 46 XY karyotype, who got pregnant and gave birth, is not a woman.
I'm waiting for it to pop up on the screen.
Yep. Take your time.
Okay, it just popped up. All right, and how common is this thing? Because this seems like a birth defect or a biological
the frequency doesn't matter because
outlier. That would be like saying,
John, the frequency doesn't matter because you've said it's a necessity. It is necessary for this trait to exist. So in a necessary, there can be no exceptions. There can be zero exceptions. So the frequency doesn't matter.
There are biological, like
there can be no exceptions in a necessary, John. There literally can be no exception, and a category cannot be exclusionary unless it possesses a necessary condition. Otherwise, it's not an exclusionary category. And if it's not exclusionary, then there's no reason why somebody can't be in that category who doesn't fit that condition because it's not exclusionary.
Would you say that a human is a bipedal animal?
I would not use bipedal.
Not the entire definition.
No, bipedal would not be the necessary condition to be a human, no.
That is, when you look at, you're defining between different species, that is one of the things you look at. How many legs, what are the features?
Bipedal would be
bipedal
is not the necessary.
Birth defects, like medical anomalies are...
No, bipedal is not the necessary. The necessary condition to be a human would be to possess a full human genome, a full Homo sapien genome. Bipedal is not the necessary condition, right? Like you don't need to be bipedal to be human, right? Because some humans are born without two legs, right? Bipedal isn't the necessary.
The other thing is, so for Swyer syndrome, how can you pull up if that pregnancy was effective? Because everything I've read about the Swyer syndrome,
they gave birth.
The reproductive structures do not have functional.
They had a successful birth. In our current scientific literature, there have been 15 successful births, successful pregnancies that have led out of this. Specifically is a pure gonadal dysgenesis XY. So there have been successful births. These have been successful.
Were those natural, or did those require medical interventions, or was that able to be done naturally?
Well, they needed a donation of, what is it? Oocytes. They need like a donation of oocytes and then like IVF. But what does that matter?
Because if you can't do it naturally, that is a defect, that is a birth defect, not devaluing the value of someone who has.
It doesn't matter if it's a defect, it's still something but it still exists. This is the issue. Like it being a birth defect wouldn't matter. It still exists, right? Your claim was that there are no women who have Y chromosomes, and yet this is a woman with a Y chromosome. Whether it's a birth defect or not doesn't matter. What I'm trying to instill in you really quick before I end the call, because somebody did pay to move on. What I'm trying to instill in you is that human sexual development is way too varied to use that as our placement of a necessary condition. Because almost anything you say that is going to be a sexual determinant trait and say that, hey, this sexual determinant trait is what makes you a woman, you're going to have people that you would call women that do not possess this trait. And this is one of those instances. This is somebody who's a woman. You've said the trait is the lack of a Y chromosome. These are people that are women who have Y chromosomes. There are even people who are women who possess the SRY gene, which is what activates on the Y chromosome in order for someone to be male, right? The SRY gene can activate on the X chromosome. So using that as your necessary condition falls apart. So now we have to look at what we should be using it as a necessary condition. And I believe because gender is a level of identity and identity exists within the brain, what we should be using is some level of subjective understanding of our innate identities as opposed to some sexual category. And I'll give you a chance to respond.
Of legislative, I 100. Sorry?
I'll give you a chance to respond, and then I'm going to have to move on.
For purposes of legislative and how we interact in our daily lives, I would 100% disagree. I will give that there can be some grace and variance given towards people with very rare medical conditions. But again, for the way we interact in our daily lives, there is so much that goes into the way you progress as a man or as a woman, such as through puberty, the way your hip bones develop, that go through and allowing such things such as transgender sports is not only dangerous in many cases to women particularly, but encroaches on the spaces of those biological male and biological female athletes, or such things as the bathrooms. I'm fine with, unisex bathrooms, but allowing your biological man into a biological woman's bathroom and vice versa, for purpose of legislation, I think is absolutely not the case. And of course, there is rare
my issue with what you're saying right now, John, is that you only want to use gender as a social category when it benefits you, and when it doesn't benefit you, you no longer want to use gender as a social category. You can't say gender is strictly biological, but then the reason why we have to separate gender is because of the issues with sports and bathrooms. Those are all social things. So I would just reject
those are
that
biological, because there's a biological difference between the development that makes it harmful.
No. Sports is a social
specific
thing.
co-ed sports. Yes, there is.
Sports
a man
is social.
Is biologically stronger than a woman because of testosterone, because of bone density, because of bone structures. That is inherently true.
No, sports are social aspects. Sports and bathrooms are all social things. Yeah.
A man with the same level of training, at the same age as a woman with the same level of training, the man is going to hit harder. He's going to have stronger bones, and that is not devalue, or that is not anything against a woman. That's just a biological fact. And so putting a female boxer with a male boxer is a unnecessary danger, and not the same playing field.
Why did Billie Jean King beat Bobby Riggs at the Battle of the Sexes if the men who are equal standards are always going to win?
There is a skill difference that you can overcome in some sports, but it is an unnecessary risk.
It's not biological.
Tennis, for example, is not a combat sport.
Okay. If it's biological, why is Patricio Manuel like 3-1? He's a trans man boxer who has beaten like most cis men who try to fight him. Why is he 3-1 right now? If it's strictly biological.
After being hopped up on test, it's still a risk to them because of bone density and progression throughout puberty, because bone density is absolutely different.
Your bone density increases
if you hopped up on testosterone, you can try and close that playing field. And again, a very talented
he closed the playing
woman
field.
Athlete can be a not nearly as talented male athlete, but it is still
you're claiming that Billie Jean King was a really good woman athlete and Bobby Riggs was a really bad man athlete. So
I'm saying it is absolutely an unnecessary risk, and it is putting people at risk. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you disagree that males inherently have higher bone density, higher testosterone rates?
Yes, I would disagree that men have higher bone density. Actually, we see bone density kind of shifting amongst races. Typically, black women have a higher bone density than white men. So yeah, it's not a sex-based thing.
Is a black man going to have a higher bone density than a woman typically, though? So
black men are the ones who should. So nobody should compete against black men then. If we're splitting it bone density, black men are at the peak, and like nobody else should be allowed to compete against them because they have an unfair advantage by being black men. Based, I agree. Good conversation, John. I agree. Black men are sitting at the pinnacle. That was John. Let's pay to boot a while ago. I just wanted to get to a point where I felt like we could move on from the conversation. And that was the stopping point for me. Thank you guys for watching. And shout out to my YouTube members. Their names appear on the side. Membership starts at $2.99 and gets you access to early videos, uncensored videos, and members-only content. Also, shout out to Tier 4 members, Bamji, Matthew Holloway, Vampy, Kelsey Dooley, Kelsey K, Jake, Marceline, and Yemye. Tier 4 members get to help choose debate topics, and their contributions go a long way to helping me create higher quality content for all of you. Remember to subscribe for your daily dose of leftist debates, and I'll see you in the next video.